Why does the heart instinctively resist certain ideas, even when the intellect appears convinced? This question reveals a paradox at the center of human understanding. The intellect can analyze, compare, and reason, yet the heart often remains uneasy in the face of ideas that seem logically sound. In psychology, this inner conflict is called cognitive dissonance, the tension between what the mind accepts and what the deeper self cannot reconcile. For Al-Ghazali, this dissonance was not a flaw of emotion, but a clue to the layered structure of human knowing. The intellect alone, he argued, cannot guarantee truth. One can be intellectually informed yet spiritually misaligned, knowing much but understanding little. In this lecture, we will explore why the heart resists false knowledge, how Al-Ghazali defined true understanding, and how modern psychology and neuroscience illuminate his insight that knowledge without sincerity breeds confusion rather than clarity. Humanity today lives in an era of unprecedented access to information. We scroll, watch, and absorb more content in a single day than medieval scholars encountered in their entire lives. Yet paradoxically, confusion and anxiety have multiplied. Cognitive science calls this information overload, the condition where the mind receives more data than it can meaningfully process. Instead of producing wisdom, the flood of information fragments attention and weakens discernment. Behavioral psychologists add that our brains are wired for dopamine-driven novelty seeking. We crave stimulation, not depth. As a result, people often mistake data accumulation for growth. They feel educated but remain inwardly unsettled. In Al-Ghazali's terms, the intellect has become active, yet the heart remains dormant. He warned that not all knowledge benefits the knower. Some distances the soul from truth. What we now call content consumption, he might have called knowledge without illumination. To understand this paradox, we must turn to the life of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, 1058 to 1111, one of the most influential thinkers in Islamic and global intellectual history. A jurist, theologian, and philosopher, Al-Ghazali mastered logic, metaphysics, and theology by his Yet, at the height of his scholarly success, he experienced a crisis that modern psychology would call existential dissonance. Despite his vast learning, he felt inwardly uncertain. The intellect had delivered information but not conviction. This turning point led to his withdrawal from academia and the composition of Deliverance from Error al-Munshid min al-Dalal, where he concluded that true knowledge must transform the knower. Knowledge that sharpens debate, but does not purify intention, becomes a source of arrogance rather than insight. He divided all knowledge into two categories: useful knowledge, that which aligns the intellect with sincerity and ethical purpose, and useless knowledge, that which feeds pride, argument, or vanity. In modern terms, he was diagnosing the same psychological imbalance we face today: a surplus of cognition and a deficit of integration. False knowledge, for Al-Ghazali, is not merely incorrect information. It is any knowledge pursued without orientation toward truth. The problem lies not in the content, but in the motive. He observed that people often seek knowledge for recognition, competition, or authority. A scholar may study theology to win debates. A student may pursue learning to gain prestige. The intellect is exercised, but the soul is not refined. In Ijar Ulam al-Din, he wrote, "Knowledge that does not purify the heart increases the distance between man and God." Cognitive science mirrors this insight. Psychologists call it motivated reasoning, the tendency to process information in ways that confirm our pre-existing desires. Neuroscience further explains that the brain's reward system releases dopamine not for truth, but for validation. The intellect thus becomes a servant of the ego. Such knowledge cannot rest in the heart, because it violates the psyche's demand for internal coherence. The heart's intelligence, that intuitive capacity for recognizing harmony, senses dissonance long before the conscious mind does. What the intellect calls cleverness, the heart experiences as unrest. For Al-Ghazali, the heart is not a poetic metaphor. It is a faculty of perception. The intellect dissects, but the heart perceives essence. When purified, it reflects truth as a clear mirror. When clouded, it distorts perception. This model finds resonance in contemporary science. Studies in neurocardiology reveal that the heart possesses a complex neural network communicating bidirectionally with the brain. The vagus nerve and heart rate variability are linked to emotional regulation, intuition, and decision-making accuracy. From a psychological perspective, researchers describe emotional coherence, a state where feeling and reasoning aligns, essential for clear thinking. When emotion and intellect conflict, cognition becomes distorted. Thus, the heart's rejection of false knowledge is not mystical superstition. It is a biological and cognitive reality. The nervous system itself resists inconsistency. Al-Ghazali's insight anticipates modern understanding. Purification, not accumulation, restores discernment. Among the spiritual pathologies that Al-Ghazali diagnosed, none was more insidious than vanity born of intellect. He warned that the scholar's greatest danger is pride's the belief that knowledge grants superiority. In Aisha Ulamaldin, he compared such intellect to a lamp shining outward while leaving its own room in darkness. The person appears wise to others, but remains blind to himself. Modern psychology identifies similar distortions. The Dunning-Kruger effect shows that people with limited understanding often overestimate their competence. Self-serving bias leads individuals to credit success to intellect and blame failure on circumstance. In neuroscience, these tendencies are associated with overactivity in the default mode network, the brain's differential loop responsible for maintaining ego identity. When learning inflates self-importance, the heart cannot accept it. It recognizes that truth has been displaced by some. Hence, Ghazali's warning. The greatest veil is the scholar who knows everything except himself. The heart rejects vanity's knowledge because sincerity is absent-hand without sincerity. Understanding collapses into self-deception. Authentic knowledge, Al-Ghazali argued, is not static information but performative truth. Tit manifests in action. He summarized this in a single statement. Knowledge without action is madness. Action without knowledge is vanity. For him, intellect must serve moral intention. Knowing is incomplete until it reforms conduct. This logic parallels the cognitive behavioral model in modern psychology, which holds that genuine change occurs when thought, emotion, and behavior are integrated. Insight alone rarely transforms. Transformation requires repetition, embodiment, and application. Neuroscience supports this. Only repeated ethical behavior rewires neural pathways through neuroplasticity. Therefore, the heart accepts knowledge that translates into action, because such knowledge unifies the inner and outer dimensions of being. Theoretical knowledge that remains unpracticed divides the self. In this sense, epistemology and ethics are inseparable. To know truth is to live truth. One of Al-Ghazali's most profound ideas is that the heart perceives truth immediately, while the intellect understands it sequentially. The mind analyzes. Modern neuroscience validates this distinction. The limbic system, responsible for emotional evaluation, often responds milliseconds before the prefrontal cortex formulates conscious reasoning. This is the basis of intuition judgment without explicit deliberation. Al. Ghazali expressed the same principle centuries earlier when he wrote that the light of the heart precedes the logic of the intellect. When a piece of knowledge contradicts the soul's inherent recognition of truth, the fitroth, the entire organism, signals discomfort, unease, restlessness, tension. This phenomenon aligns with Antonio Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis. Bodily sensations register cognitive inconsistency before we articulate it consciously. Thus, when the heart rejects false knowledge, it is expressing epistemic integrity. The body itself safeguards truth through intuition long before rational analysis intervenes. How can this framework be applied in a modern intellectual life saturated with distraction? Al-Ghazali's principles translate remarkably well into contemporary psychological practice. Cognitive humility recognizes the limits of your understanding. Intellectual humility improves learning, retention, and adaptive reasoning. Studies confirm that humility correlates with greater curiosity and openness to correction, attentive silence, singular periods of contemplative silence or mindful breathing quiet the brain's default mode, network and reduce amygdala reactivity. These states restore coherence between thought and emotion. Meditation enhances interoceptive awareness, the ability to sense internal truth signals. Ethical integration. Apply what you learn. Moral and experiential application consolidates learning more effectively than abstract study. When knowledge is embodied, it becomes wisdom. Purification of intention. Examine why you seek knowledge. Is it for recognition, utility, or truth? Research finds that intrinsic goals, those aligned with personal growth, produce greater psychological coherence and satisfaction than extrinsic ones. Through these disciplines, intellectual clarity emerges naturally. When the heart's sincerity aligns with the mind's analysis, the individual experiences a rare state, inner conviction without arrogance. Al-Ghazali's insight remains timeless. The heart rejects false knowledge because it recognizes dissonance between truth and being. Knowledge that flatters the ego produces agitation. Knowledge that refines intention produces peace. Modern science now echoes this logic. Cognitive coherence, emotional regulation, and intuitive awareness all depend on alignment between intellect and affect. The so-called heart's rejection of falsity is therefore not mystical sentiment but epistemological precision. To know truly is to become inwardly unified. To learn without purification is to multiply inner noise. In an age of endless data, Al-Ghazali's message is more relevant than ever. Knowledge divorced from sincerity becomes information. Knowledge joined with humility becomes illumination. Real learning, then, is not measured by how much the mind can store, but by how deeply the truth can rest within the heart. The purpose of knowledge is not to expand the self, but to dissolve the illusions that keep truth unseen.